Hello everyone, my name is Neha Ojha. I have multiple roles that I'm playing currently. At IBM, I am a senior software development manager in charge of leading a team of engineers who are spread across the world, working on the core part of Ceph. For those of you who know Ceph, there are components called Raiders, view store, which is the object store. There is something called telemetry, and there's a net new project called Cruising, which is about adapting Ceph to next generation devices. These are the kind of things that I'm leading at IBM. In the open source community, I have the role of Ceph Executive Council member. Essentially, in 2021, Sage Weil, who is a PhD from UCSC, operating those in Carlos, decided to do other things in life beyond Ceph. Being the founder, we decided to fill his shoes by means of a Ceph Executive Council, an elected body responsible for running the open source Ceph project. So I'm part of that council. I'm also a Ceph Foundation board member. So that's the current me. Let's go into a little bit of background. I think I mentioned it to Stephanie. I saw a sticker in the registration desk about Cross, which said it was founded in 2015. That is also the year I started my graduate degree in computer science at Brasseur School of Engineering. So clearly a lot of great things happened in 2015. And the other great thing that happened is I met Carlos, a great man, who ended up becoming my advisor and kind of shaped my life in a lot of ways. So very thankful for that, but we'll go into that later. But essentially what happened is that I worked with Carlos in the lab as a graduate student researcher. He connected me to another great man, Sage Weil, who gave me the opportunity to work at Red Hat in the Ceph project with him essentially as an intern. And after graduating in 2017, I went back to work for Ceph at Red Hat full time. Started out as an IC, became a maintainer of the Raiders component that I just talked about. Was Raiders maintainer for about 5 years. Moved on to engineering management and leadership in the community, and that's been my life thus far. So I'm very thankful to UCSC for introducing me to open source, and I'm very proud to be here on this panel today talking about how open source plays a role in the industry. That's me.
All right. Hello, everybody. This is a time when you have had food and it's a long wait till you get the next snack. So let me come back to this. My name is Arun Gupta. I'm a vice president at Intel. I lead the open ecosystem team at Intel. I think anything around open source strategy runs out of my team. I'm very deeply involved with the Linux Foundation. For example, I'm on the Cloud Native Computing Foundation Governing Board and the Governing Board Chair. I'm also on the Open SSF, Open Source Security Foundation Governing Board, and the chair as well. Over the last 2 decades, I've been in the Bay Area for the last 25 years. Over the last 2 decades, I have built and led open source strategies for Intel for now. I mean, that's part of my team. But prior to that, Apple, Amazon, Sun, Red Hat, so these are the places where I've built and defined open source strategies. So I'm going to keep it my introduction quick, and we will get into a more deep dive later.
Hi, everyone, again. I'm Brasseur. I asked the question earlier, so you got kind of a little bit of an intro. I am currently at Semios. We do agriculture technology. Prior to that, I've been all over the place. I've been entering open source software for more than 30 years now. Formerly Vice President of Open Source Initiative, Linux Professional Institute, OpenSource.com, et cetera, blah, blah, blah. You know, we've all got our very long, impressive list of bona fides up here. So it's actually lovely to be in such great company of people who accomplished in free and open source software up here. At Semios, I am the head of open source strategy and open collaboration. So it's not simply your standard inbound, outbound, what software are you using, are you complying with licenses and lovely stuff like that. But it's also about the greater ecosystem, not simply the open source ecosystem, but the agriculture ecosystem. and what can we do to help to open up the ag ecosystem. And if you listen to the panel prior to lunch, you got to see a lot of or hear a lot of the challenges that the ag world deals with all the time. There is an immense amount of data. There are a lot of farmers out there who really need help doing that. And it's not that they aren't willing to, it's just that they're really busy trying to farm. So what can we do to make life easier for them so they can grow more sustainably and to help our earth and our human beings be more successful? And that's what I'm going to be there to help with. Spot.
Hi, I'm Tom Callaway. My friends call me Spot. I am a principal open source strategist for a small startup selling books out of Seattle. You might have heard of us. We're called Amazon. My role is to help Amazon and its customers and its partners and its communities and the open source ecosystem at large to be more sustainable and resilient and to have the things they need to be able to continue to do good open works. There's a lot of details under that, but that's the broad simplification of what I do.
So for this panel, we're most interested in sort of how industry engages with open source, because I think there's places where you do engage and there's places where it's maybe contradictory to what are you trying to do in your companies, right? And so there's interesting questions here. So the first thing I want to ask about is the challenges. And since I'm an academic at a university, I want to expand this question. So like, what are your challenges working in an industrial environment with open source? But then also, what are the challenges maybe in engaging with academia as you try to address those challenges? So the challenges both with interfacing with us and with interfacing with open source, and sort of how does that fit into what you're doing? And I think we can go into any order. Who would like to?
Okay.
Okay.
So I think there's two topics. I'm going to pick the second one because it's more important. I think that one of the big differences between industry and academia is timescale. I think that industry is moving much faster than academia is, and there's often a real mismatch in expectations as a result. I think that, it's very common for, especially for research, to look at something and say, this is something we know is going to take multiple years to even start to show results. And industry is like, well, what can you do in 3 months? And, the idea of trying to convince industry to do multi-year funding for academic programs is really challenging because they want to see what they're going to get for that investment, because they do perceive it as an investment. And there's, it's more challenging to convince them that they should participate in academic structures when a lot of the work will not bear fruit for a long time, or it's foundational work that will lead to other things, that will lead to other things, that will lead to other things, that will eventually lead to something that can be sold to other people. And so one of the things that I think is interesting when we think about how open source can sort of mitigate this to a certain extent is that the return on that investment is very obvious. It is the open source results that are there for anyone to pick up and carry on, and for it to be more public than having this one-to-one relationship with any particular researcher or any particular institution, and being able to say, hey, we are partnering with them. Their results will be open source. Anyone else who is interested in this can tap into this and build on it. So we're making an investment that's going to return this result that anyone can pick up on, not just us, but more broadly. For some companies, that's not compelling. They want to be the only ones that get to own that thing that they paid for. But I think for a company like Amazon, it's interesting because the first question that we always ask at Amazon is, how will this benefit our customers? And open source is a very clear answer to how it will benefit our customers, because it is there for them to use, for them to take advantage of, for them to find the right fit for, and to actively participate in growing it and shaping it to solve the problems that they have. So from my perspective, it's really sort of trying to figure out how we can bridge that gap to help academic open source programs to understand how they can align themselves at least a little bit to the way that industry kind of sees the world. So when industry squints at them just right, they go, oh, okay, I understand what that looks like. I understand how that fits into my worldview. And my role is sort of on the industry side, is to sort of say, hey, here's here's what they're really saying when they say unrestricted funds. Here's what that really means on the other side, so that I act as that sort of translator between the two worlds. And that's an ongoing challenge. And I think the more that we can start speaking that common language, the better off we are.
Work our way down?
Yeah.
That was great. So listen to Spot. Spot's got great ideas. He really did a great job, I thought, of summarizing a lot of the differences that we see between academia and industry, and timescale is certainly one of them. And that's also one of the things that I've hit as I've joined Semios something like 2.5 or so months ago, which is the timescales of agriculture considerably different from what I'm used to. And say when I worked at Juniper Networks or HPE or something like that, you know, we're working on years for say a single product to roll out, not weeks. So, and that way we can relate a bit more closely to academia. But in another way, I found that academia and industry are actually similar. And that is one of the challenges that I've faced as I've worked with dozens of companies and individuals. And that is that they don't really understand open source, let alone even think about it. I have worked with, I don't know how many C-suite people who tell me, we don't use open source. Oh, sure. It's like, oh, you don't? Oh, bless. And so they don't really understand the value of getting out of open source. And they also don't understand the value they can get from releasing open source. Now, on the academic side, when I speak with people, they have done all this fantastic stuff out there. But as we heard on the academic panel, when the researcher moves on, that work often gets abandoned. When it could be released as open source by something like JOSS, the Open Journal of Open Source Software, where you can release it and also get publication credit. But people don't consider, well, here's the value that I can get out of that. Here's the value that I can provide out of that. You know, it is a give and take of the value. So just getting people to consider open source and the value that it can provide to your company, to your lab, what can it do for you? That actually is a bigger thing, because we think about money, we think about publication, right? The things that get us credit, the things that make us look successful in our society. But there are other things that we can do to help make others successful while also helping ourselves, and that's open source.
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest challenges in open source that we see in the industry side of it is the maintainer burnout. You know, an open source project is started, somebody is a maintainer, you know, they're the sole maintainer of the project, they're not getting support from others, but that is the only person maintaining it. And eventually they say, you know what, I'm done. This was my hobby project and now this is becoming critical. Why should I maintain it? And we have seen cases where we have pitched in that, okay, hey, I'm willing to give a maintainer, but that sole maintainer doesn't want to take give a maintainer right to anybody else. But so then it becomes a very complex problem. How do you solve the maintainer burnout? And within the CNCF governing board, we have talked about it multiple times. Kubernetes project is 10 years old. There have been several maintainers who have been there from pretty much day one. But there is a serious maintainer burnout because the incentive mechanisms are not there. Like, are they recognized in their company for doing that upstream work, which doesn't add to your bottom line? I think that's a fundamental broken incentive structure that needs to be fixed. And that's something we educate a whole lot within our company. On the academic side, you know, Intel has always had a very good relationship with the academia. You know, for example, chip cycle, you know, it's not like a few month cycle, it's a few year cycle. And in that sense, that relationship with academia on doing the research and creating that next edition of the chip works really well. And as we are moving towards sort of the Gen AI, LLM and all that cycle, a lot of that research is also happening in academia. So I think there is a good impedance match, so to say, on the chip side, on the LLM side, But then how do you make sure that it's actually the common incentive structure between the academia and industry is super important. End of the day, we are a commercial company. We need to stay in business and sell our products. And how does academia help us? I think what you talked about, translator. I think that's a super important role that, okay, here's what the grant comes in. Here's what the academia is going to deliver. Here is how it's going to translate to our revenue. And then vice versa, how much grant we should give so that you can show the path a year or 2 or 3 years out the line.
That's it. I'll try to answer the first part of the question, challenges in the industry. Clearly, the whole business model of Ceph is software-defined storage, and that is what IBM product is. But the most common question is, what is the differentiating factor? Why would somebody use IBM Ceph versus open source version of Ceph? And I think that's where I see there is an opportunity in this challenge, where somebody, one of the panelists mentioned, the success of an open source project comes from the number of users, usage at scale, and enterprise users at scale. And that's where I feel the opportunity lies. Companies like Red Hat and IBM have the ability to provide solutions based on Ceph without touching the core, the open source nature of Ceph. While the open source project continues to be an option for people who want to innovate, who want to build their own business model on top of it. But I guess you need to have some strong backing in terms of companies that can make open source projects de facto usage in the enterprise industry. Otherwise, it's about just having a GitHub repo and just saying that, hey, I have so many stars, but if you don't have any users, it's no point, right? So I think that's my take on it. And the challenges that I see is with large companies backing these open source projects, that also brings up opportunities for students. And it's research opportunities that all of you talked about. There's also about opportunities that we make in terms of the class that we had at UC Santa Cruz, where we were reading papers from the industry that were very, very relevant. And, we kind of learned a lot of those things that were being used in the industry, even before entering the industry. And I can see a lot more of that happening since I started out in this industry with things like Google Summer of Code, outreaching, Grace Hopper Open Source Day. That's a new thing that came up that didn't exist earlier. In fact, I myself am partnering with the Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, which has a dedicated course every fall and each spring to actually send students to go into a seminar where different open source projects are pitching their project, and students then work for 6 months on that particular project, submit something that is measurable in terms of a pull request and get evaluated. So they're kind of doing actually the job of developers even before becoming part of the industry. So those are the opportunities that I particularly see with open source. And people like us look for open source in people's resumes, right? So it's a huge plus to have open source experience in resumes. So I think that's how I would sum it up. There are challenges, but there are lots of opportunities, lots to bank on.
I'm so happy you mentioned opportunities also. That was going to be the next thing I was going to ask about. So you've led us in well. I think there's lots of challenges there. I think that probably everybody in this room believes there's opportunities for industry to value from open source. You obviously think so since you're here. I'm interested in the opportunities sort of cross-sector collaboration, especially, right? Because, okay, we're sitting in a university. Where are the places where, I guess I also want to know how you're benefiting from open source, but where are the places where there might be collaboration between the various people in this room that we might be able to get to?
I touched upon it and make it short and help you all pitch into. So one thing that I feel like we talked about, research projects just remaining research and never landing into products per se and things like that. I feel like for any open source project to be successful in the long run, there needs to be a lot of strategic thinking into the project. And it needs to be coming in from the maintainers, from neutral parties who have a role to play in the roadmap of the project, and hence a lot of products. So in our day-to-day, we talk about a lot of tactical things. We need to address immediate problems, but I feel that is where we can use research to make some strategic decision, incorporate strategic decision making. But I feel like, we have to be more close knit to be able to do that, so that, we're not on our own tangents, like, you doing your thing, I doing my thing, and therefore nothing, it's cohesive in a way that makes sense for everybody. So I think we need to make this collaboration and encourage events like this that help us talk to each other and talk about hey, what's going on? I just talked to a gentleman who educated me around so many things that's going on in the industry that I had no idea about. Now I'm going to go back and talk this about with my industry partners, right? So I think that's where I think word of mouth, we need to talk more, we need to meet more and make progress in terms of strategic thinking.
I think the sessions and the panels are great, for events like this. The opportunity really is in the hallway track. I had such a wonderful conversation on a lunch table, or as I was walking in, talking to people, identifying common connections. There are so many opportunities. For a very selfish reason, we want new blood to come in and be able to ready to contribute to open source, right? And that's super important. Now, how do we grow the workforce? How does growth happen in the industry? So that's where, and the other important part is open source is not just about code contribution. Code contribution is probably 20% of a project. 80% of it is actually non-code. You need somebody to run the events, you need somebody to do the bug triage, you need somebody to do the project management, reviewing the pull requests. This is chopped wood, carry water work. This is super important. That's how you sustain in the long run. Because if everybody want to do the glorified work, it's not going to sustain at all, as a matter of fact. And one of the things that we do in CNCF, KubeCon, which is a flagship event happening in 6 weeks in Salt Lake City, we're looking at about 13,000 developers. The project Kubernetes is 10 years old, but in the last 10 years, there are so many people who have come into the industry who may be aware of open source, but they know nothing about cloud native. This is the first time they're touching cloud native. So in an event like that, we are doing Cloud Native 101 track. It's the premier elite conference, but we're doing a Cloud Native 101 track. Emily and I were talking about, we would love to engage with students who have no clue how to send their first pull request. And seeing that twinkle in their eye that, you know what, it's not that bad. It's not that hard to send a first pull request. I think it's super exciting because you never know how you enable them and what journey, how deep their rabbit hole goes, and they get excited about it.
I've got a book for that. So I really like what was said about getting people together. So I go to a lot of events. I don't see any of you at them, but I see these people. Right? Okay. And I see Stephanie. But we don't get a lot of mingling between industry and academia. I don't go to academic events and conferences. It's not that I don't want to, they just don't end up on my radar. Right? And the things that you all are doing at academic events are moderately different. They have different outcomes. You have publications and things like that coming out of them, which is not the same sort of things we have at our events. So I think finding a middle ground like this, where we all can get together and meet in a neutral position, where you're not trying to get your publication and worried about reading your paper, right? And we're not trying to schmooze quite as much for our next job or whatever it is that we're doing at our events, right? And so just having these opportunities are incredibly valuable for that. I actually showed up here partly because Stephanie sent the link and I clicked on it, so thank you, Steph. But I came here because I saw that we were having an agroecology panel. And one of the things that's very important to Semios in the next year and going on is building those relationships with the researchers, because there is so much work going on out there in agriculture across the world in the research space. We heard about some of it earlier. It's just fantastic. But also our farmers, they completely rely on their ag extension offices. And those are coming out of of the universities. And if we are not engaging authentically with the ag extension, with the ag researchers, then we are not collaborating and we are failing. We have to support this overall ecosystem that is supporting us. And so that's why I showed up here to make sure that we can start to open those doors, because they are difficult to open between industry and academia so often. And somebody has to start reaching across the aisle. Because frankly, if academics come to us often, first thing going through our head is, oh, well, they want funding.
We
Right,
do,
and so-
we do. We want funding.
Funding. I want to give the funding. I don't have a budget. But when I do, but you can see how that might color our initial interactions. And so what can we do to dispel that initial problem that we might have starting that? And having something like this really helps a great deal. So, you know, kudos to UCSC for that and Steph and her entire team.
So a lot of good points already said. I'll add in one more. Open source is people. It's not code, it's people. And that is where its strength is. That is what its powerful is. This combination of experiences, mindsets, knowledge, wisdom, work put together to solve problems, to make things better, to make things faster, to make things smarter. And that's an opportunity. No matter what the problem is, that's an opportunity. And students and faculty and researchers are potential. They get so much from engaging in open source. The students who are here to learn and then go into industry want that real world experience that they can get from doing open source in a practical sense. They want to be able to show their future employer that they can collaborate, that they can solve problems, they can hack on other people's code, they can do things in the real world without having to have done them yet. Open source is a powerful way to accomplish that. They want to partner with the people who are staying to do that long-term research, who are thinking about the hard problems that technology needs to solve as it goes forward, because those problems exist in the real world too. And we want to be able to have an opportunity to tap into the wisdom that all of these people have. One of the wisest things that was ever said about open source was that it's incredibly arrogant to believe that all of the people you have hired are the smartest people on the subject. Open source says that that's not true, embraces that that's not true, and opens the doors for people who have insights and wisdom and skills and talent to be able to work with other people who have different but still valuable sets of skills. And so I think that's a huge opportunity from my perspective, is to tap into all of the potential that exists in the academic space and bring it into a common space with industry.
If I can break it down tactically, I would love to see, like Steph, I know you are trying this effort to bring all the UCs together. I would love to see like a UC industry connection, set up like a quarterly sync, quarterly advisory board or something like that, where you're bringing people from industry. And let's not make this only about give us the funding, otherwise we'll not operate with you. Because honestly, the university students need mentorship, right? So that's where we can help. We have projects, so industry has projects where we would love to see contributors. We would love to help them gain mentors. We would love to provide mentorship over there, help them rise up the contribution ladder, let them become a maintainer. Who knows, the new Ceph comes out of it, right? So I think those are the opportunities that I really see. Set up like a regular sync between UC and the industry. UC is the largest university in the world, university system in the world. So like, let's set up not just UC, but across other academias. How can you set up a regular cadence? How do we be deliberate and clinical about it? That this is what we want to get fixed, and how do we make forward?
I think you made a very good point. Like, I said I'm a manager. I have recs. I haven't done recs. How do I, connect with the right people in UC standards? And, without having to make LinkedIn posts that goes to like, 100,000 people nowadays. So I guess targeted partnership with the people who can give opportunities. Again, not talking about funding here, but at least job opportunities.
I think it's funny that you distinguish job opportunities and funding. From my point of view, those are the same thing. I have students, I need them to get paid to do stuff, right? Whether you're paying them in your company or you give me money and then I pay the students, it's the same. But
I'm just bringing a perspective, how the perspective is
that's
seen
right.
in the industry.
Right, it's fair that we do come, please. Right, you'll all get asked before you see. So I think I appreciate you both moved to something. Several of you moved to something that I want to ask about because it's our chance to get this advice from you. It's like, where are the places that you'd like to see academic OSPOs, offices at academic institutions, however they're named, that are trying to deal with open source? What are the specific sort of projects and things you'd like to see us support or spearhead, right? So I want you to imagine like, okay, you get to be the direct boss of Stephanie and I for the next year. What are we supposed to do for you to make your life good in a company? And if we know what those are, then maybe you'll get some of those things and it'll lead to these collaborations.
I think I kind of touched upon this topic. I feel more relevant research, and when I say relevance, we have to talk to be able to understand what's relevant to us, what's relevant to academia. A lot of the open source projects actually publish roadmaps around where they want to focus in the next 3 years, 5 years. So don't focus on the tactical 1 year thing. Focus on the 3 year, 5 year thing and see how you can help make something more efficient and kind of complement some of the work that the developers are already doing. And particularly from Ceph standpoint, like there are clearly areas of performance that we're looking into. If you have creative ideas around performance and you want to pitch it, come to one of those meetups in open source. Like we also have a lot of virtual meetings that we do around these kind of stuff. Like, we have user developer meetups, we have just developer meetups. So, and anybody is welcome to join. So if you have an idea that you think is relevant, come and pitch it to the right people at the right time. And I think that's where I feel like, the communication is going to get more close-knit, and therefore you will start to see how we can use your expertise, research expertise in the product directly.
I think one of the richness of the universities is there are lots of different subjects. Computer science is just one of them, because that's directly contributing to the code. But there is humanities, there is arts, there is material science, there is chemical science, all sorts of stuff, business, administration. And guess what? Open source needs all of that help. So if I were to guide sort of the academic OSPOs to do that, is engage across the different streams and figure out what is the life cycle of an open source project. So let's say if you want to work with Intel, and we launch a new project with the Linux Foundation called as OPM, Open Platform for Enterprise AI. That is to simplify your Gen AI development. So take a look at the project, see what and Neha talked about it. Take a look at what the project roadmap is, what the bugs are. Yes, you can submit the pull request to get the issue fixed, but hey, this project needs help with a bit more evangelism. This project needs a bit more help with connection with the community. This project needs a bit more help with triage of the issues, or somebody has maybe an expertise in creating a Jira issue tracker. These are all non-code jobs. I think that's maybe a mandate that I would say that focus across different streams, engage different departments, because, I think Spot you talked about, open source is about people. How do you bring a diverse set of people in this very inclusive manner in this open source project? I think it should be the key.
So what you can do for us to make it easier for us is to tell us about you. Tell us what you're doing. Be loud about it. Like, don't keep it in the academic circles. Don't do that. When I joined Semios a couple of months ago, I added more than 50 RSS feeds to my reader. I added probably 12.5 mailing lists. And the first 2 hours of every day is just tracking this to see what is going on. That's a lot of work. If there were some place where people could all get together and just be talking about what's going on in the ag space, wouldn't that be lovely? So that would make my life a lot easier. I would be able to go, oh, you're working on this really cool thing to have bacteria develop power that you can use in the field. Oh my gosh, we have IoT in the field. Wouldn't it be great if my IoT people got together with you researchers And maybe you could work with us. And we have test beds, but I didn't know about it, right? So how can I give me ideas where I can find you? Right, and I'll be there. Okay, good, thank you. And so one of the things I'm doing in the next quarter is I'm rebooting AgStack, which is a foundation for the for agriculture, technology, and infrastructure, and it's under the Linux Foundation. It currently is working on stuff, but the website hasn't been updated for a while, so it doesn't look like it, but it is. And part of that rebooting is spinning up a Discord, which is public, it's open, anyone can show up and listen or talk. And I don't care if you're in industry, I don't care if you're in academia, I don't care if you're a farmer in the field, if you're an agronomist, it doesn't matter, right? Show up and listen and tell me what you're talking about. And don't just tell me, tell the other 500 people in that Discord room. Excuse me, in that Discord room, what you're talking about. So don't just keep it to yourself. I want to hear about cool shit you're doing. Share it.
So everything that all of them said, plus this. I want to see academic OSPOs make brave spaces for diverse open source contributions. I want them to consciously make the barrier for entry for diverse students, diverse participants to go down. I want to make it easier for them to take that first contribution, to not see open source as this terrifying thing, to get that practical experience of participating in projects. And that doesn't just happen magically. That happens because you build programs, you curate work, you do workshops, you create materials they can consume independently, you create opportunities for them to drop in and participate on campus. Honestly, all of the things that you're doing already in this regard, you are setting the standard for what it looks like to do that successfully, and UC Santa Cruz should be very proud of the work it's doing.
So I want to give a chance for people in the room to ask questions. I would like to use my moderator privilege to encourage you to ask a question as opposed to give us a 5-minute commentary, because we want to hear their answer. So you may have to give a commentary, but please get to the question. Oh, why do you guys? No, no, no. That was just.
Just very easy questions. So how about open source projects that come out of academia? You talked a lot about open source projects that come out of industry. Well, I mean,
I'm the exception. I'm the exception here.
but it's actually, it's now firmly rooted in industry. How about a research group that has a very interesting new open source project? How would industry want to interface with it?
So I have a number of friends who are researchers and they work in open source. Not coincidentally, work in open source. And one problem that they consistently have is that they release things and nobody knows, right? And so they can't build a community. If I, from industry, in any of my previous roles in industry, I would need a neutral place for it to be, right? I don't care if that is somewhere under the Apereo Foundation, or that's under Software Freedom Conservancy, or that's under GNOME, or Eclipse, or Apache, or LF, or any of them. I need that protective covering of a neutral home, because when you move on, because being an academic, you're going to move on. What happens to that project? Did I just inherit it? I don't have the resources to take that on all myself. But if it's under a neutral home, I know that there's a better chance of a more diverse group of institutions forming around that. And that would really help to resolve things for me. Also, it'll give me a better chance of finding out any stuff.
So I think there's two things. I think that the first thing is there a community or is there just some code in GitHub? Because a community goes a long way to mitigating risk and becoming a lot more interesting to me. And I think that's an opportunity for an academic hospital to invest in code that has potential and to help it to grow a community, because then it's a lot easier for me to say, hey, we should also participate in this, as opposed to sort of the problem that you so eloquently said, of what happens when the researchers get interested in something else. If they're the only people that have ever committed to this repo, then the grad students, then this isn't a community, this is a vanity project. I think the other thing is awareness. I think that unfortunately there was a fantastic platform for these sorts of things at opensource.org, and that doesn't exist anymore. And I think that it would be really nice to see some sort of standard platform for academic open source projects to be able to market themselves more broadly, so that there was one place that all of us industry open source people can go to see, hey, what are the cool new projects, and not have to spend time trying to read academic papers. I'm just going to ask the panel, how many of you read an academic paper this year? 1 out of 4. So we're not actively looking in that space to find those projects. And I think we need to figure out what a better mechanism is to surface those in a way that we can see them.
I would just add a comment that what you are seeing is very much what happens in the industry as well. The only difference is, like, if Intel launches a project, open source project, then we have our existing partners in the industry, and then we can rally them up. We'll put it, like, as Vicky talked about, in a neutral Linux foundation. And then we write their code tests in terms of all the marketing machinery and everything else. So some of the things come as part of it, but without being deliberate about, like, let's say you created a project and you figure out that, okay, you know what, this project is going to be relevant to these 4 industries. And in those 4 industries, here are my 3 top players. So you need to be a bit more deliberate that, do the people in those companies who are leading their OSPOs, again, I'm doing a multi-agentic workflow here, but with the people in those OSPOs, they understand this project. Do we have a connection with them? Have we tried to reach out to them? So if you're not going to be deliberate about it, gone are the days when you will build and somebody will come. So you've got to be just deliberate about it. And that's exactly the process we follow in the industry as well.
Yeah, really quickly as well. Really quickly.
You're just going to have to be loud.
So sorry, I just so being deliberate about is the critical path, right? And that's a lot of work that's actually not in the job description, either of the graduate student nor other academic advisor.
Fair point.
That's the really big problem.
No, I understand. And maybe what you want to do is you want to pick, in that sense, your first 1 or 2 tipping points, the critical partners who believe in your mission, and then take you over the hump, essentially.
Well, they don't.
You
That's my
also,
experience, right?
you
So that's-
also convert this assistance into your grants.
Yeah, but all of this I tried, believe me, and it's too slow. We come back into the time scale problem, right? And so it's with just the resources as they exist today in the university, it's not going to happen.
My 2 cents is, I think, 2 words: by influence, by marketing, right? You know, when I say by, make your work by either of those or both of those. And I think conferences like Open Source Summit need to be a channelized way of doing that. There is literally a conference that happens, like, multiple of them happen each year. But are they actually addressing this problem of the open source industry? If not, they need to think about it. So take it to those forums where they have the funding to actually create an audience to listen to your real problems.
Thank you. We're kind of talking about incentive alignment, largely between academia and the industry. I'm wondering what the panelists are excited about broadly with economic incentive alignment, from either being maintainers to industry, and maybe thinking about, like, the advent of quadratic funding, or how industry is thinking about these things.
So the reason Intel contributes to open source projects, we contribute to about 400 plus community managed projects. The reason we contribute to these projects is because our customers, when they use our silicon, hyperscaler, laptop, wherever you're using it, we expect that those open source projects that you will download will be fully optimized for your silicon. And that is direct tie-in to our business imperative. So that's sort of the reason we do it. So a lot of the times, we grow maintainership inside the company, but a multiple number of times, we just hire the maintainer that, oh, you're working on this in a hobby. I want you to work on this full time, work on an Intel time, essentially. So continue to do what you do because 80% of the time you will exactly work chocolate and water what was required by the community. But 20% of the time you'll make sure that Intel chips are actually optimized in the open source as well. So I think the maintainership is frankly one of the biggest incentives that the industry would see that, oh, you know what? Over the last 4 years, the student who has been at UCSC, we got them inducted into day one as a contributor, as a user, and we made them rise through the ladder. And by the time they came into the junior year of undergrad, they're a maintainer. That becomes extremely attractive for the industry. And thereby comes in sort of the sponsorship part of it. We may not be interested in paying direct dollars because the budgets are tight, but we may be very willing to hire that maintainer in that case.
And I'm a classic example of that. I have literally been there, done that, and I'm very proud to also say that there are at least 4 to 5 people in my direct team who have been Google Summer of Code contributors, who have been outreaching contributors, and have been interns who I have converted and brought into my team, and they're just flourishing like anything, and I wouldn't be surprised if they become maintainers.
So what I'm excited about is that for me, it's such a target-rich environment, which is also incredibly intimidating. But when I joined, I mean, obviously, any company that's going to throw money at hiring somebody to do open source strategies sees that it's strategic to their bottom line, right? So I don't have to, for change, convince the C-suite that this is important. So that was easy. But I showed up and there were all these people who were like, oh, thank God you're here. I really want to collaborate with open source. I don't know how. We want to do this. We don't know how. There are these researchers we want to work with. We did it all wrong. We pissed them off. How can we do it right? How can we collaborate? How can we do this? And I'm like, this is great. I've got all these people who need my help. Oh my God, these people need my help. And so it's really exciting to see that I actually could help Semios make a difference in agriculture in the open source space, right? Not only what we do and collaborate with by way of AgStack, but also just in general, what can we release? How can we collaborate with existing things? When I saw that oats was going to be represented here, this was very exciting to me because it was an open source thing in academia around agriculture. And that's exactly the sort of thing I want to learn from, and I want us as a company participating. So that's really exciting. I really do see that there's so much potential here in agriculture that it's untapped, and that's fascinating.
So I think that your question kind of taps into a broader perspective that I spend a lot of time trying to figure out, which is how do we help these open source projects be resilient? How do we help them live for long term to avoid burnout, to have the resources they need to be effective and be successful? And money is part of that. It absolutely is, but it's not the only part. Money has to be mindful. If I dropped $1 million on an open source project, it will not have the interaction that you think it will. People make poor decisions when they're handed large sums of money in the broad sense. You can look at lottery winners to understand that. But there are lots of different aspects to the problem. If there is a single maintainer on the project that's something that's important, how do we help them identify the opportunity for new roles in that project that other people can entrust in that space and participate and not have problems like we have with XC, which we're going to hear about later. How do we provide necessary infrastructure for projects to be able to build robust CI/CD test infrastructure so that they can know that they're making changes that aren't going to tear everybody up when things don't work, that they have a space where they can experiment and continue to develop and grow. All these things need to be present for these communities to be able to turn their own flywheel. So yeah, spending a lot of time thinking about that. Don't have the answer yet, but at AWS, we have a credits program that we provide to open source projects so that they can have the credits they need to run their infrastructure and don't have everyone paying for it. We actively work to train Amazon engineers to become maintainers in upstream projects so that we can have more maintainers on the projects that matter.
Thanks. We have time for one more question. I think I'm gonna let Owen just get the last question.
Go on, thank you, Dave. So as a researcher that is more on the foundational end of the spectrum, I'm wondering, we've talked a lot about like, you know, the return on investment, making it relevant. I'm curious if you have any guidance for, you know, those of us that are more, you know, mathy and more whiteboardy than committee. And like, I definitely have, you know, I released all of the things we implement as open source, but it's Haskell, you know, like, are there ways that we can make these, you know, foundational advances that are relevant to the like long-term goals of a lot of your companies, more relevant to the investments that you want to make in research, you know, either through open source or by the way that we build on the academic open source projects that we're releasing to make it obvious what the value of it is to you.
So my answer to that is to be a storyteller. Tell a really good, compelling story about what could come from this. We won't hold you to it. But tell a really good, thorough story with color, with detail. You see the big picture. You see where this could go if it pans out. We won't. Tell that story, tell it loud, and tap into the folks that are on this panel to help amplify that story, to give you the opportunity to tell it to more people in spaces where they'll hear it. I think it's not magic and it doesn't always work, but I think that gives you the best chance of success.
And don't limit yourself to academic conferences. Go out there, find some industry conferences and present. They present in a totally different way than your academic conferences do. So keep that in mind. You're not going to stand up there on a podium and read your paper. You will get booed off the stage. But look for those and talk about them. Because often there's journalists there. And also make friends with your university marketing teams. I guarantee you, they want you to write blog posts. They want you, they need content. They need so much content. So if you don't know how to tell that story, sit one of them down over coffee. They can write it for you. They can ghostwrite it. But make friends with marketing. They are awesome.
Real quick, I wanted to jump in that PyCon US, if you happen to be in a Python space, is a wonderfully hybrid conference. They have poster sessions. So you can do traditional academic storytelling in that sense and have it tap into industry in a powerful way. So look for those opportunities as well.
I believe they also have a science track.
I think there's a clear impedance mismatch in terms of the academic papers written and how industry is able to parse them. I would kind of elaborate on what Scott said. Maybe have a section in your paper which talks about there are 5 different ways that thesis could be applied in the industry. Be very direct as opposed to hypothetical. Like, this is how it would benefit, like, you know, step A, B, C, this is how it benefit the industry. For example, I believe this performance improvement that I've done will make Intel chips 3x better in 2 years because of this research, and then engage at that level. So the more direct, the more deliberate, we talked about the deliberation part of it. I think the higher the likelihood. And again, I would emphasize it on KubeCon is 13,000 people we are expecting in Salt Lake City. Paris was 12,000 people. So be diverse across the industry, because the more you travel to the industry conferences, the more you build that network. We are equally hungry to build. And frankly, the reason I came here is first of all, because Stephanie invited me. And second is I want to build the connection in the academic OSPOs as well to figure out what's going on. But there are only far and few of us. Let this not be far and few. Let this be like a norm where you reach out equally to the industry OSPOs. Let's build that network strong.
And then I'll keep it short. Nobody has the time today. So like that's the reason we like the LDR versions and emails, right? Papers are great. You know, 3 of us haven't read a paper in a year, tells a story. Blog post is something I would highly encourage. You just use something plain simple. Put all your blog posts in one place and use social media, right? Like today, the LinkedIn is one of the most powerful ways of like spreading messages across research and in the industry. So use things like LinkedIn, put it on your resume. There are the things like, you know, you have to be persistent. Shameless persistence pays off at some point.
And though I don't normally show for the Linux Foundation, I will point out that any Linux Foundation event, if you get accepted to speak, they are very, very good about paying for your speaker, for your travel. So they can get you to the conference. I know, Ronnie, actually, they are really very good. Angela and her team are fantastic. Well,
Don't get people excited.
I have found, and all of my friends have found that they are very good about it. And so if you don't see that a conference lists that they will pay for your travel, ask. Just ask, because I know it costs a great deal and you're academics and you just don't have that kind of money. But there are lots of conferences that will pay for your travel and your hotel.
I would just be reported that the record show that Linux Foundation just committed to buying travel for a little bit. Thank you, Linux Foundation.
Yeah.
All of you.
Thank you.
Okay, let's thank our panelists.